and welcome to episode 1 of Conspiracy or Mystery. In this series, we will go over the world's most mysterious and devious documented tales from across the globe and present the case to one of our fellow GHOUL BOI members who has either never heard of it before or their knowledge is very minimal. And we let them and you, the audience, decide whether you think the case is a conspiracy or a mystery. We're going to be talking about the Fernald School in Waltham, Massachusetts, and it might look a little bit familiar to you guys. A lot of the buildings were designed by the same person who designed the Metropolitan Hospital that we investigated in episode 2. In this episode, we're going to be presenting to Dante.
Hello.
He actually didn't know too much about the Fernald School because I didn't bring it up to too many people besides Tristan because he already knew about it a little bit. Little known fact, we were actually trying to do a hunt at the Fernald School and
Very politely told, absolutely not.
I called the mayor's office to see about permits for filming, and they were very nice. The secretary was very nice. She's like, yeah, let me transfer you to the mayor. And then I got to the mayor, and I asked her, hey, is there any possibility of going about filming permits for certain locations in your city? I didn't even mention the Fernald School. And she was like, yeah, of course. We could definitely help you out with that. Unless it's the Fernald School. It's completely off limits. And like her tone completely shifted. Her voice went to a lower register. I was like, oh, interesting. Is there any reason why? And she was like, we can't comment on it at the moment. So I did a little bit of digging, and this is some of the stuff that we found out. But with that out of the way,
I don't know shit.
So on our first slide, we're going to be talking about the Fernald School history a little bit. And oh, good, you brought a notebook.
He didn't bring his crayons, but he did bring a pen.
Oh, listen, fellas, I come prepared. I'm ready to go. Oh, my pen.
Is your pen dead?
There's a lot of notes
Oh,
to be
God.
Pen works. All right, we're good.
Okay. Now, originally, this is the oldest school for mentally disabled in the Western Hemisphere, which is actually kind of crazy to think about. It was the first ever in all of North America and South America to be publicly funded by
the state.
By the state to try to help these mentally disabled people. We'll get into that in a little bit, but they really didn't understand their disabilities and how to go about that very much.
Yeah.
It was actually formerly called the Massachusetts School for the Feeble-Minded.
Sounds a little rude.
You'll come to find that they use a bunch of terms back then that weren't very PC
That puts
today.
feeble-minded at the bottom of the list of insults.
It's just like, you suck.
Sure.
The institution was originally opened in Boston in 1848 by Samuel Gridley Howe. Now that is a name that you're going to want to remember.
Gridley Howe.
And then the school moved to Waltham, Massachusetts under direction of a new superintendent, Walter E. Fernald.
That's where the name Fernald.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, good connection there. And now we're getting into Walter E. Fernald.
Look at the mustache. Whoa.
He did have a killer mustache, as you can see right there.
Wait, that eye's going one way and the other one's going
the other. He was a doctor? He was born in Kittery, Maine in 1859.
I know some folks up there.
I visit to Kittery all the time. I drive through it on my way up to Lincolnville. He graduated from the Medical School of Maine in 1887 and then moved to Boston.
Well, like, why did he move here? To start the...
No, not to start, but
practice?
but to practice.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, to practice medicine.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, he graduated from the Medical School of Maine, which to me does not sound like a
very
real
sophisticated school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then, once he had moved to Boston, he received an honorary master's degree from Harvard University in 1913.
Honorary.
So,
big thing right
if
there.
you guys know what an honorary degree is, a lot of celebrities, a lot of politicians, they'll get honorary degrees from universities because they know somebody there, or they're well known, not because of their academic prowess.
Yeah, so in other words, a handout.
Yes.
He was given a degree because he's that guy.
I wrote not a real degree.
Nice. Okay, you're getting it. He once believed that people of mental disabilities needed protection from a predatory world. Walter then, after he graduated and moved to Boston, became convinced that the world needs protection from them and their defective, delinquent tendencies, and then embraced the emergence of eugenics. Do you know what eugenics is?
And it sounds familiar.
So eugenics is the basis of the Nazi Party.
Oh, we're going down this road.
Yes, and this was well before the Nazi Party. This was in the late 1800s. It was very propaganda-based, where people believed that people with mental disabilities were defective and delinquents.
Because
and
that's
Basically
we
like a
needed-
danger to society.
Yeah, that they needed to be separated from everybody and put in institutions like this.
I don't like this guy.
Yeah, not a great guy. Now we're getting into how Walter E. Fernald came to power. In 1888, he became the third superintendent of the Massachusetts School of the Feeble-Minded. He remained in charge until he passed away in 1924. Under his control, the institution grew from housing 142 inmates to housing over 1,300.
Holy
And this is how they refer to them too. Inmates.
Inmates, not patients.
People.
human beings.
Yeah.
No. But according to the National Park Service in the town of Waltham, he brought a more scientific-based focus, consisting but not limited to psychology, social work, and research. And a lot of that was a little bit of pseudoscience and a little bit of early science where they weren't really understanding the effects of what they were doing to people.
So let's say instead of science, experiments.
According to Harvard Law School and Harvard Magazine, he was known as an extraordinary propaganda politician and also the world's leading authority on intellectual disabilities at the time, and that which helped cement his role and influence in the field. He was the world's leading with an honorary master's degree.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
All right, so in this slide we have the HOWE Library. So constructed in 1917 and named after the former founder Samuel Gridley Howe.
Which we brought up earlier.
Yep.
He
Interesting.
was the former superintendent as well.
So the state awarded this institution with a loan to build the library. The HOWE Library opened over a decade before the admin building, and its location suggests it was chosen to be there to greet people as they come and go, as well as an employee rec center.
As time went on, it became more and more of a rec center and less of a library.
I was just about to say less of
And
like
they started to like store items there.
So it was obviously originally built, as we said, with the intent to welcome guests and be an overall activity center for everyone there. Until the closing of the school, the HOWE Library was regarded as the most comprehensive collection of works on subjects of developmental disabilities in the United States. The basement.
oh God.
Doesn't look very
Doesn't look very
library-esque.
appealing.
What was
no.
in my basement?
From 1917, 1918, the current superintendent at the time, Walter E. Fernald, used leftover state funds to repurpose the basement with no official use designated.
They used extra leftover funds from that loan and used it to repurpose the basement. And they never put down an official use for why they repurposed the basement.
They just said, "Hey, let's build a basement." Let's just
No, the basement was already
The basement
there.
was already there. It was just pipes and just empty rooms. It was just an unfinished basement.
They get the funds, they make this building, and somehow a few $1,000s that was not used goes without question. A few years later, those funds are now used to do stuff in the basement,
When they could have paid the loan back off with it.
or used it for the actual
I was
purpose
about to
of being
say,
a
a
library
library.
rec center. So that raised the mystery of why was their funds not used in the beginning, and why were they finished using the funds to repurpose a basement. Yet clinic, dental, x-ray, and autopsy, and surgical rooms, as well as a sterilization room, were opened in the basement of this building. Why was this and then the basement done when 90% of this complex wasn't even done?
But in 1970, the basement portion was designated to the Southard Institute for Research in Normal and Pathological Anatomy.
I don't like the word pathological.
It's never a good term to throw
I
around.
don't like that word just being tossed around like candy.
And in 1971, the basement medical labs were combined with the Warren Anatomical Museum from Harvard University.
Warren.
Warren, Mass.
Oh. I was going a completely different route there. Like Ed and Lorraine.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh. little ghost hunt shout out.
Didn't know. Yeah, shout out to those
Check
guys.
out our last ghost hunt. And yeah, it was a museum at Harvard University. Now, Harvard University, that is also a name that you might want to write down to remember for later.
I'll just put it in quotes on top of this.
Nice. Okay.
Harvard.
I can't wait to read your notes at the end.
There's I want to like. So shut up. There's a couple that like I skipped over because like I want to watch the slide.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that you'll see.
If it's important, I'll point it out. Now, this is where things go off the rails. As you can see right here, we have the medical bay again, but right below it, as you can see, are brain samples.
In a library?
You're gonna get a little bit more context into that in 1 second. The medical portion of the basement in the HOWE library ended up collecting over 1,200 human and animal brain samples. They were dissecting and slicing the brain into slices to test.
In the library too.
Most, if not all, of the brain samples they collected, including the human ones, are still in the building to this day.
Those?
Yes. So this actually isn't the picture from the building. This is from MIT because they can't release photos of patients and they are still in the file cabinets and in their casing and just there to rot instead of them taking it and putting it in a proper facility like they're supposed to. And in 1986, 2 preserved heads of men who were executed during the Spanish Civil War were discovered in ceramic jars hidden in the wall while 2 maintenance men were installing an AC unit.
What?
Yes, their names were Pedro and Sexto. Those were the names engraved on the jars, and they were embalmed in a type of fluid that would keep them preserved. It looked like they were in there since the inception of the school, but they were found in 1986, which is over 100 years after the founding of the school. There's an article that I read where one of the people who worked at the school was quoted in saying, I'm going to abbreviate because I don't know the specific quote off the top of my head, but he was saying that we have no idea how that got there, but testing back in the day was a little bit weird. So it makes sense with the type of testing that they were doing back then, which doesn't make any sense to me why there would be ceramic jars with their heads in the wall.
From these guys from the Civil War.
Like I get if they had their brain like slices with everybody else, but they had them hidden in the wall, plastered into the wall. They were trying to hide something.
Yeah.
And no police were involved. It made the news for a week.
No investigation behind it.
Both heads were actually buried in the Metfern Cemetery. They were planned to be buried the next day, but yes, the Metfern Cemetery, which is where we caught
those voices, the whispers, the children laughing.
Yes. So Pedro and Sexto were buried in the Metfern Cemetery, which is a combined cemetery from the Metropolitan State Hospital and the Fernald School.
Which both these buildings were just down the road from each other.
Yeah.
Not a far walk.
Yes, but the interesting part about both of these buildings is they designed them in a way where they would be built where you can't see them from the main road. Now for this one, we're getting into a video portion.
YouTube.
Yes, we're going to get into the mishandled confidential paperwork, just like the brain scans that the brain samples. The brain samples that we were talking about earlier. It gets into a little bit about Laura Zigman's journey to try to find her lost sister who went to this school. As you'll see, she has very limited information about her own sister.
Laura, tell me about your sister Cheryl.
Well, that's a good question. I think if I had the files, I would know more, but my situation is a little different. I was trying to do research for a novel, and my sister had a medical condition. She was born in 1958 with a really rare bone disease. So at some point, again, I would like the files to know exactly when, she went from living at home to living at Fernald in one of the really good medical buildings called the Green Blind Unit. And she died there when she was 7.
I'm just going to be cutting in here and there to add some extra context to some of these clips that we may have overlooked or not ended up talking about afterwards. And like I said earlier, it was really hard for Laura to find anything about her sister at all, and it's just really tragic that her sister ended up passing away at only 7 years old, being in the care of the Fernald School.
Massachusetts has some of the tightest privacy laws in the country, if not the tightest. And he said, you will need a lawyer likely to even find out if there are records and then establish guardianship. I think he said I would have to establish guardianship first and then ask if there were records. And I might do all that and there might not be any records.
Now, isn't that insane that she would actually need to hire a lawyer to establish guardianship for her sister sister who passed away, her older sister nonetheless. It's really crazy to me. And the fact that there might not even be anything is even crazier.
We actually have 2 pages from a 1966 annual report citing the number of patient deaths, their ages, how long they were a resident in the school, and their diagnosis. The majority of the diagnoses here were listed as idiot, imbecile, and moron, while a couple note that there were too young to test here or died before an IQ test obtained.
Alrighty. So
That was interesting.
yeah, it got in a lot more in depth into personal cases and a little bit how they were treated, how they were referred to as imbecile, idiot, moron. Some of them were too young to test. Some of them died before they could be tested because of their mistreatment. Some of these people were in prison for 70 years. Some of these people, it's crazy. They've been in their whole lives.
And this is just
A fraction.
65 and literally just a year period of,
Yeah.
like, that's crazy. And you have 17 male deaths and 17 female deaths in 1 year.
And that's just the reported deaths.
And the next part of this complex is the power plant. Originally built in 1921, this power plant was made to replace the near outdated equipment that they had at the time in the Belmont and storeroom buildings. Although some buildings were heated by smaller individual oil burners, most buildings on the property were heated by this oil-fired power plant. The steam pipe systems created to heat all of the many buildings was an iron pipe system insulated heavily with asbestos and reinforced with concrete service tunnels that connected to many buildings.
But it's pretty interesting that they reinforce them with service tunnels and not just concrete service pipes to reinforce it.
Now we're talking about tunnels. That gives us access, or
We talking
Gave-
about tunnels?
we talking about practice? It gave them a secretive way to get around, I'd
Yeah.
say. Many think it's just tunnels for plumbing. I think there's a lot of really awful things that
Multi-use,
probably,
yeah.
multi-use, yeah. So the power plant building has 2 branch systems, east and west, that directly serve to heat 38 of the 75 buildings on almost 200-acre property.
Which is ginormous.
That's pretty big.
The east branch serves steam heat to 18 buildings on the property. And the west branch connected and served 20 buildings with a hydraulic loop located in the northwest quadrant of the institution.
Good use of the word quadrant.
So this hydraulic loop linked to the GREENE building to their high pressure steam system, which served 13 buildings, including the Cottage complex, Brookside, and Woodside buildings.
So for this one, we're getting into that cottage complex that I was just telling you about. So this is cottages 3 through 13.
Holy.
There were 11 cottages in this complex, all in a U shape. This complex of cottages is made up of 11 identical U-plan style buildings, officially constructed in 1979. So one of the later constructions. The cottage complex at Fernald was made to house residents of the Fernald School who are able to, and I say this in quotes, live more independently than others. That was the quote from the Fernald School, and I'll let you be the judge of that. Each building was composed of a group of 16 residents, or as they referred to them as inmates, in each housing facility in the cottage complex. Although they say the buildings were for patients who were capable of independent living, Cottage 3 specialized in behaviorally challenged patients, and Cottage 11 was a clinical unit for intensive subacute hospitalization, for subacute rehab from surgeries and other operations or incidents. So they said it's for people who can live by themselves more, but it's also for people who can't live by themselves because of having surgery on property.
They're playing the double-sided sword here.
A little bit.
I'm starting to not like these Fernald guys.
Yeah.
Oh, it was just one guy. Just one Fernald.
So that's a spooky room.
Yes, that is the inside of
That's
one
the
of the
spookiest
cottages.
part of the room.
Yeah, there's some children's drawings up on the wall there, some flowers and some other things. These small-scale style patient wards started a brand new era of more intimate and home-like structured living accommodations that many institutions like the Fernald School adopted before the mass shutdown of state-run facilities across the United States in the late 1990s. It feels like a, yo, let's save our skins from all the weird stuff that we were doing and try to create a new sort of tactic at going at this head on with trying to help them instead of separate them. You're trying to get them back to living. And then they did this about 20 years before the school shut
The
down.
late 90s.
Yes.
But now that's for all the facilities run across the state, not just.
No, the United States.
Oh,
Yes. The whole entire United States. All the buildings on this complex and its records were destroyed in 2015.
wow.
So they never actually pulled out any of the records. They just demolished a building with the records inside of it, which is very interesting if you ask me, if they were doing home-like structured living accommodations and trying to get people back to normal life.
Trying to cover something up. This whole thing was a cover up. And here we have, or somewhat have, the Wheatley Hall.
The street actually isn't visible. This is the most recent picture that we have right here. The road is not visible anymore.
Yeah,
This is
right.
the building, I think 10 years prior, where you can see the curb and the street. And then
See,
we have
nature takes its
That looks like a
course.
tree.
there are many trees, yes.
Originally built in 1933 in the far northwest quadrant of the property, leaving it curiously isolated from the rest of the campus.
So this is what we were talking about earlier, how they used the north quadrant. It was more up on a hill. They tried to separate a lot of inmates from the normal dormitories where the mass was.
It is a small, unassuming structure compared to the administration building and theater built in the same year. In the building's infancy, they operated as a 50-bed nursery caring for the youngest patients in the institute, some no older than newborns.
Wow.
Which is pretty interesting that they would keep the newborns so far away from the admin building where they would be dropped off and away from a lot of the main
The
building's
nursing
care.
halls.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the rooms, or wards as they referred to them as, were designed with high ceilings and large windows all around the building to maximize the sunlight and ventilation.
Yeah, as you can see in that photo in the top right, we got the big windows all around the room with the arching ceiling. They were trying to get as much natural light inside for the patients, or
Which is
for the
odd
newborns.
for just being
yeah,
newborns.
They're newborns.
Wheatley Hall gains its name from Dr. Frank G. Wheatley, who was the president of the Board of Trustees from 1911 to 1926, who was instrumental in changing the name from the Massachusetts School of the Feeble-Minded to the Walter E. Fernald State School when Fernald died in 1924.
Instead of being like Massachusetts State School for the mentally disabled or something like that, they changed it to the Walter E. Fernald School when he was all about the emergence of eugenics and all of that, which is just absolutely insane to me.
But at least this guy didn't be like, yo, is still the school for stupid.
No, he was part of it.
Yeah.
So Wheatley Hall, the basement. So the basement of Wheatley Hall did not appear to have been built with patient use in mind due to the many exposed pipes and utility lines.
As you can see, they're pretty well exposed.
However, the many children's paintings on the walls, as well as the alphabet written on the walls, are evidence of the contrary. It is possible that the small single-story building had outgrown itself until the larger green unit was constructed nearby in 1953. If they had intent of housing so many, why didn't they make the building larger
Bigger,
to begin
yeah.
with?
And now we're getting into the green unit.
Ah!
The green unit was constructed in 1953 on the far northeastern corner of the campus property, so adjacent to the northwestern corner. The building that was 113,000 square feet and had a capacity for 108 beds was the largest building constructed at the Fernald Center at the time, and was named after Dr. Ransom A. Greene, who was next appointed superintendent following Dr. Fernald's death in 1924.
Dun, dun, dun.
Are you seeing the connections a little bit?
Everything's connected. Anyone with the name Ransom is cool.
Hey, yo, Ransom, come over here.
Yeah, that's a fire name. Should I name my kid Ransom
It's even
Jackson?
better that it's Dr. Ransom.
Dude,
Like
that
Rampage
was all-
Jackson?
It's like a evil villain named Dr. Ransom.
This is the men's side of the ward. As you can see, the walls were painted blue. The women's side were painted pink. And down here is another interesting room that doesn't really have a designation. Part of the building served as a residence and training facility for the blind patients, commonly known as the Green Blind Unit. These programs focus on helping said patients live with their blindness, which included the Hoover method, which is the training that blind people do with the white cane for mobility. The Green Unit was also used as residence for dependent non-ambulatory clients. Non-ambulatory is patients not able to walk or move by themselves. It is very likely that these operations were moved out of the aging Wheatley and into the newer Green Unit when it was constructed, which is very interesting because if they already had the operations over there,
Why?
why completely move them over here and get rid of them over there when you could have it running at both if they're in the same area. A large heated indoor pool was also added to the building. Pretty baller.
All right.
They also had a large gymnasium with mezzanine seating, backup generators, and steam conversion system that connected for cottages 3 through 13 that we were talking about earlier. So this is where the loop connected. Now we're getting into the basement of the Greene unit. And as you can tell, there's a little bit of a pattern forming. The basements were not always used for the most good things.
Yeah.
The basement of the Greene unit contains some rather odd testing labs and equipment. They had behavior scopes, periscope-like instruments that allowed doctors to observe patients isolated in a separate room while patients were subjected to various stimuli to see how it affected them. So in here they would subject people to different audio noises, electroshock therapy, just any forms of stimuli to get a reaction. They were just trying to figure out what happens when we do this.
They're poking and prodding.
Pretty much. The unit was actually demolished in the fall of 2019, and in 2023, the Parks Department in Waltham officially restored the original wetlands to the area where the building originally stood.
So we are going to touch on the farm. In 1887, the farm was purchased while the school was still located in Boston, Mass, and it was acquired for the construction of the brand new school facilities. This purchase contained 18 acres of land, a stone-built farmhouse, and a barn. By 1888, the farmhouse had been converted into a home to house 20 to 30 boys from the school, making this officially the first building on the property.
Pretty interesting, yeah. So they shipped out 20 to 30 boys to live in the farmhouse.
That must have not been fun.
Yeah, especially with some of them having mental disabilities.
20 to 30 of them just huddled in the...
Yes.
Yeah, and it wasn't converted yet to house them.
That's like
They were
the
just
worst.
thrown
Just
in there.
cramped, yeah.
Here's a sleeping bag, figure it out. The young men brought in from the original school in Boston were described as quiet, industrious adult males who did tasks such as digging drains, clearing the land, and constructing roads essential for the new buildings being built.
Now, I don't know about you, none of these people look like adults to me.
Dude, that kid's like barely taller than the rock.
Dude, they're like 9.
In 1891, once the boys' dormitory was built, they could leave the farmhouse and reside there as needed. Only 3 years of uncomfortable living situations.
Forced labor.
The Fernald School steadily expanded the campus area from 18 acres to a massive 196 acres. As much of this land was cultivated much like traditional farms, ensuring the cultivation of fresh vegetables and fruits for the children. A dairy facility collected milk, stables for workhorses, and a slaughterhouse that processed pigs and poultry meat. This is a school, by the way. Much of the outdoor labor was done by the older boys, while the girls focused more on drying, canning, and preparing raw goods for the market or consumption by patients. Surplus products were sold to offset operations costs of the Fernald School by tens of thousands of dollars each year.
Wow.
All the surplus that they didn't use at the school, they would sell and make money off of the disabled children's labor.
And that's where the whole slavery thing comes about, is these kids were working, they weren't getting paid, and I'm sure they didn't even know that it was being...
They were selling it,
yeah.
yeah.
Or at least that the money wasn't being used for them.
The labor was originally thought to be therapeutic up until the 20th century and is now seen as exploitative of the disabled as well as forced child labor. Although being heavily criticized by the public for its forced labor on the disabled children, they were never formally charged. The police were never involved, there were no lawsuits.
Because it's state connected, dude, of course.
The farming operations officially ended in the 1970s, so they repurposed the buildings as garages, sheds, and storage for the campus's grounds department until the eventual closure of the Fernald State School. And right here we have one more video that we're going to get into. It gets into a little bit of the patient's point of view of what was going on and a little bit more of anecdotal evidence from what they experienced that wasn't written or recorded or there's no evidence technically of, but they went through it and you can tell how much it harmed them. But with that out of the way, let's give this a quick playthrough.
The people who ran Fernald back in the bad old days are no longer alive, but many of the victims still are. Victims like Fred Boyce.
We thought for a long time that we belonged there, that we were not part of this species. We thought we were some kind of, people that wasn't supposed to be born.
It's incredible.
It's nuts.
Not in a good way. Incredible as in like shocking.
Yeah.
I kind of thought for a while maybe there was something wrong with me. Or why would I be here?
There was, in fact, nothing wrong with Joe Almeida, but that didn't prevent him from getting swept in the system. He was an abused child, and when he was 8, his father took him for a drive to the Fernald school and told him to wait in the hallway.
I said, wait a minute, Dad, where you going, you know? He goes, oh, you wait right there. He goes, I gotta go get the car. And he went, and that was the last I seen of him.
It's pretty wild that Joe got dropped off by his father. His father goes, I'm gonna go get the car, you stay here, and he never saw him again.
The ultimate, I'm gonna go get milk.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
And as we said in the beginning, like, this whole complex was originally for mentally disabled, and then soon came to be just
dropping kids off like a fire station.
Yep.
It was a school in name only. A child would experience the first year of school 5 or 6 times in a row. He would read the same Dick and Jane reader and never make any progress because the school wasn't equipped to actually educate children. It was there as a sort of holding.
It's honestly insane to me that an institution that holds themselves to this high caliber would not only treat patients like this, but also refuse to actually help them.
Joe Almeida had an unusual job, and the fruits of his labor are still there 50 years later.
My job was to cut these up.
What he cut up were the brains of severely retarded people who had died at Fernald. He cut them into thin slices so they could be studied by scientists. Nothing ever came of the research, but the bits of brains are still there.
Now this clip right here, that's exactly what we were talking about earlier, where students were tasked with cutting up former inmates' brains who had died there on property.
They had what they call Red Cherry Day, okay? What Red Cherry Day was, they'd sit us all in a circle and they'd call you up alphabetically. And lucky me, my name is what? Almeida. You'd get up in front of all these kids and you'd pull down your pants and you'd pull down your underpants. They'd make you turn around and they'd whack your ass with this branch until it was red like a cherry.
And the abuse that these poor victims went through too, it's really no laughing matter. Like, it's crazy how swept under the rug this all was, and that these nurses and workers that were hired to try to help them ended up being the ones to abuse them the most.
This Miss DeRosa used to have 3 or 4 kids urinate in a bucket, and she'd have them throw it in your face. I mean, these people were sick that worked here.
Sexual abuse? Of course there was sexual abuse. The place was tailor-made for it.
That was a 60 Minutes interview from 2004 where they had Fred Boyce and another former inmate talk.
Joe Almeida.
Yeah, Joe Almeida.
That's him right there.
Where they talked about their former experiences.
There's a few different forms of research, treatments that went on throughout this school that were very much not okay.
Yeah,
and
like having the kids slice up former inmates who died's brain for
kids
research that they never ended up doing.
Yeah, so another thing, one of their tests that they did on these kids is they would just play loud sounds. Just basically their whole point to it was to overstimulate these kids to where they got so overwhelmed that they would pee themselves. And then they were yet again tortured and disciplined for peeing themselves.
Yeah, for doing what the test was made to do.
So we're gonna get into the food service hall. So originally built in 1931, the old food service building served as a central kitchen to supply a quickly growing population at the Fernald School. Here meals were prepared in bulk for the majority of the residents as well as other institutions and some local colleges. They had large industrial machines that made processing large amounts of food at one time easier. They also had a large wing attached to the kitchen that was used as a communal dining hall, complete with serving area and decorative chandeliers. In 1959, they had a large renovation done by adding a loading dock and extending the kitchen space.
Loading dock is needed.
Yes, especially when you're shipping out to as many schools and institutions as they are, which we are about to get into.
By 1973, the food service hall supplied a large number of local institutions, including the Metropolitan State Hospital, Gardner State Hospital of Boston Mental Health Center, Danvers State Hospital, Medfield State Hospital, Foxborough State Hospital, Rentham State School, Grafton State Hospital, and Cushing Hospital.
Which is pretty interesting because it's like in the middle of nowhere in Waltham.
Yet the building was mysteriously used less and less when new food service buildings, the Parkman building, was made, despite the ongoing substantial growth of the population of inmates at Fernald School.
They still had problems with getting the correct amount of food for their kids, even though they were sending stuff out to all these other institutions and state schools. And instead of keeping both kitchens open, they started using this one less and less and less until it became decaying.
The food service hall's special diets. The old food service building also served as a central hub where specialized diets would be tailored and prepared by doctors and the resident dietitian. The Fernald School nutritionist grew concerned that a diet heavy in cereal might slow down the body's ability to digest the two key minerals, iron and calcium. So they thought the best way to remedy this issue is by putting radioactive forms of these two minerals in their foods.
Yeah, naturally.
What?
Naturally just jump to, yeah, let's give these kids, instead of normal iron and calcium, let's give them radioactive iron and calcium. So let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna put some radioactive stuff in your cereal tomorrow morning.
Please don't.
And this also raises the question of, was this radioactive food being sent out to these other schools and hospitals? Because the food that was being prepared here was also being sent out to these schools.
Done in the same kitchen, the same building.
Yeah, no new building made, nothing to safely do a test that shouldn't have been done, but radioactive oats, let's go. And these radioactive forms of iron and calcium are also almost impossible to find traces of in blood and human waste.
Which is very interesting that they would jump to radioactive isotopes because they aren't traceable. Now we're going to get into a little bit more of the facts on the radioactive testing. Starting in 1946, the Fernald School, along with MIT and Harvard University, started these experiments on children where they would feed them radioactive food. They did technically ask for permission from their families to do said experiments, yet never actually mentioned that the food would be radioactive.
Okay.
The superintendent would send out form letters telling their parents, "We are considering the selection of a group of our brighter patients, including your son, to receive a special diet rich in iron and vitamins." And records from the Fernald School describe the patients tested as morons, while MIT and Harvard University called the disabled teenage boys who took part in said experiments the Fernald Science Club. As you can see right here, we got some nice cereal. It looks like Honey Bunches of Oats. And down here we have a black and white photo of a bunch of kids getting tested. A little stark comparison of what can happen from that to that.
There's cookies.
Okay.
There is.
While the radioactive testing was committed by the Fernald School, MIT, and Harvard, they were also partially funded by the Quaker Oats Company and also the United States Atomic Energy Commission. Yet all the surviving details of said experiments had sat in boxes in the library until said case was opened up in 1993. Members of this quote-unquote science club would eat cereal mixed with radioactive milk for breakfast every day or digest a series of iron supplements that gave them the radiation equivalent of at least 50 chest x-rays.
Holy shit.
Not a safe amount of radiation.
No?
Oh.
Yeah. Konstantin Malekskos, pretty cool name.
Shout out to Constantine.
Konstantin Malekskos, a former MIT researcher who studied how teenagers at the Fernald School metabolized these radioactive calcium and defended the studies and experiments saying, quote unquote, they yielded important information about nutrition.
I think you lying.
I think he is too. Now we get into the congressional hearing.
Photo, dude.
On April 21st, 1994, the Radiation Experimentation Victims Act of 1994 was brought to the Massachusetts House of Representatives by Edward J. Markey. He opens up by saying, quote unquote, I think the fact that the federal government, our government, funded or engaged in this kind of activity is the most disturbing aspect of this whole story. Markey then went on to add that he wants a legislature that these three main requirements need to be met. 1. Require full disclosure from the Department of Energy while protecting the privacy of subjects and their families on experiments with ionizing radiation that provided little or no benefit to the subjects and were funded by the department or its predecessor agencies. Number 2, require that the Department of Energy to formulate a plan to conduct proper medical follow-up of subjects where it seems feasible, indicated, and to provide free medical care for injuries related to experiments. And number 3, require the Secretary of Energy, after the consultation with other appropriate federal officials, to recommend appropriate compensation for those subjects or their families who have suffered damages, and make any other recommendation for appropriate compensation for those who have been wronged. So he wants the department and everybody involved to admit fault. He wants them to come up with a proper plan in writing so that this never happens again. And he wants them to compensate everybody that was involved.
My guy Marky doesn't fuck around.
No. So Dante, what do you think? Do you think it's a conspiracy or a mystery?
First of all, great job, fellas.
Thank you.
On that, it was really good. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. Everybody in this was bad.
Yeah.
It's just
nobody involved is good.
Except Marky Salamone.
Yes.
Yeah, no. Shout out to our guy Marky.
Shout out Marky.
He just put down the foot and he was just like, just admit your fault.
Yeah.
All right, you fucked up. Why you decided to do this, I don't know. Fed kids radioactive oats, for crying out loud.
And what do you think about all the other tests that they were doing on kids that were hidden?
It wasn't needed.
Yeah.
It just like kids live normal lives.
They were normal, above average intelligence, but they were just poor and
Didn't have family.
Didn't have a family, and they got dropped off and forgotten about.
Yep.
I'm gonna go get the car. Doesn't see his dad ever.
Yeah. Yeah, he literally was like, yeah, I'm gonna go for a smoke, and just never came back.
To conclude it all and make it real confined, we have a state-run facility or state-funded facility, did illegal experiments, child labor, torture, secret tunnels. I don't know what else awful thing I could mention that would top what we've already said, but...
They were claiming in the writing to Congress and the House of Representatives that these are adults working, when that's an adult, and those are kids, and he's like 3 feet taller than them.
No, well, the adult is working. See, he's telling the kids what to do.
But they were claiming to Congress and everybody that these are adults, and only adults worked on the manual labor, when these are literal children.
Yep.
So I guess that wraps it up from our side. Dante put in his point of view. He's kind of in the middle on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a lot of information.
It is a lot of information to throw at you. So why don't we do this? Why don't we leave it up to everybody in the audience? Drop a vote in the comments whether you think it's a conspiracy or mystery, and let us know what you think about it. And obviously, there's a ton of history.
Yep.
There was 76 buildings. We couldn't cover every aspect. We covered all the main ones that we thought were most pertinent.
Yep.
If there's anything you guys know of, or if you do your own research and you want us to cover, we would always love to come back and do something more.
Any little bit of information you want to add, shoot it away at the comments. We want to know.
We would love to hear it, and we will make sure to take our time and respond to each and every one of you.
And who knows, this could lead somewhere else than just a one-part video.
100%.
But we need your help too, in order for that to possibly be a thing.
And with him mentioning that, if you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like down below, maybe subscribe if you want to come back for more content like this, and we'll be sure to have another conspiracy or mystery video for you next month.